All right, before I start, I want to clear up one thing. I've already heard comments from several people this morning about the title of this sermon, and they seem to think that I've never been thanked. It never came to me, to tell you the truth. It's about a story I want to share with you. But I have been blessed and thanked so many times over the years at this church. No, folks, it's not about me. It's about why we're here. But it did. Werner was the first one that came up, and he said, "I thought you'd been thanked." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, the title of your sermon." Well, it just never connected. But rest assured, I've received plenty of thanks over the years. Several years ago, it's probably been about 4 years now, some of you know I have been working for several years for one of the local hospice companies in this area. And we have a program and I would say a policy that when any veteran comes on our service, we present them with a little gift showing that how much we appreciate their efforts and their sacrifices. And it's a little smooth stone, and on the front it says, "Care Dimensions, thanking you for all the sacrifices that you've made for our country." Well, I think this gentleman was in his mid-90s, and he was a really nice guy. He had a little dementia, but he and his wife were living in a nice condo, and they'd had I think 60 plus years together, and I don't remember his diagnosis at this point, but anyway, he was on our service, and as it's our custom, I, as the chaplain, will make the initial call and talk to them about maybe a possible visit and how I can support them. And in this case, I asked his wife, who I was talking to, "I'd like to come over and present a little gift." And she said, "Oh, that's so nice. Come on." And so I went over in the morning, and as I remember, it was either in the spring or the summer, and the weather was very much like today. And he welcomed me, and we were sitting there chatting, and I said, "I understand that you are a veteran. In what branch?" And he said, "I was in the Navy. And I was at Okinawa, at Iwo Jima, and various other campaigns in the Pacific." And we chatted a minute because my father was in Okinawa, in the Navy at the same time, but they didn't know each other. And then I said, "Well, I have a little gift for you." And he said, "Okay." I pulled the stone out, and I said, "On behalf of Care Dimensions and our entire staff and volunteers, would like to present you with this stone to show our appreciation." And he took it, and I have a card that goes with it, so I read it, and it talks about his sacrifices and thanking him. And when I looked up, there were tears flowing down his face. And I said, "Oh, what's wrong?" He said, "Nobody thanked me. Nobody thanked me." I had to turn my head because I was almost in tears. But he was so appreciative. And all our veterans are very touched by this ceremony. Very rarely do they not respond somehow. Usually they start talking about their wartime experiences. And as we know, the greatest generation is almost gone. And those veterans of that era and later wars too didn't talk about their experiences until they began to approach end of life. I know I had that in my family. My father and I spent one sunny afternoon on the way back from a homecoming visit to the college we attended, eating waffles at the Waffle House in rural Georgia on the way back to my sister's. And he told me the entire story. And he insisted on stopping for this meal. We'd had a nice lunch and so forth, but he wanted a waffle. To begin with, the guy that developed that chain of restaurants was a college roommate of his, so he was always very fond of it. But this generation in particular now is passing. There's not too many. And we had a long discussion about his wartime experiences, and he continued to shed a little tear here and there. And at the end of the visit, I prayed and said, I'd like to come back to see you. And he said, oh, yeah, come on back. Well, a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks went by, and we had another visit, and he was not having a very good day, so he wasn't remembering much, and he couldn't remember me, or he was having a hard time with his wife remembering her and the nursing aide that was there. But I walked into the room. He didn't remember my name, but he says, oh, you're the guy that brought me the rock. Thank you so much. And as I've got to thinking about this, how do we, as people, thank our veterans? Well, we're going to have our usual Veterans Day parade tomorrow. And I can assure you, as a resident of Topsfield and a neighbor of the cemetery, that our cemetery crew has been working very diligently to make sure every blade of grass is cut and every flag is in place for this observation. And we'll observe that. And then we'll go back and we'll think about loved ones and where they are. And some of them came back, didn't have any particular problems, and led a very successful life. Some didn't come back. Some of them came back. They came back in a casket. And others didn't come back at all. They're buried on the fields of Normandy, the fields of Flanders in the First World War. Some of them are still lost in the Vietnam War, in unmarked graves in Vietnam. And then there are the unknown soldiers that do come back. What I'm getting at here this morning is that our veterans, whether they have passed or alive, need to be honored. And they need to be honored in everyday life. This program that we have at hospice is probably my favorite duty. I won't call it a duty. My favorite part of ministry that I do with these people. I look forward to every time I get a face sheet of a new patient, I go right to where that veteran is. And I've been known to give it to family members who are not on hospice, who are taking care of their dad or a loved one, and they're veterans, because they deserve that. We as a church are a welcoming community, and we welcome all. And this morning, as we contemplate this weekend, I chose this passage, and I chose it not so much of what it's typically preached about, but about this act of carrying this paraplegic in over the crowd and taking a roof off of some variety and letting him come into the middle of this group. And this is a symbolism to me of how we honor our veterans and that we focus on them. It's a very complicated passage, but in that passage, when I read it, that's what I think about, because it goes back. A few of you may have been involved. Years ago, we had a book study or Bible study, I guess it was, of this particular passage and how it meant, what it meant to us. And there were a lot of different meanings, but I immediately, for whatever reason, thought about the wounded and those that have passed, that they are in our midst. I have a very good friend that I've worked at hospice with for several years. He's a Unitarian Universalist pastor. He doesn't have a full-time pastorate now. He's working full-time as a chaplain. And he's also in the Navy Reserve. And he's assigned to a division of Marines. But he's also a chaplain that covers the arrival of those veterans, particularly Navy veterans, that arrive at Dover Air Force Base from the current conflicts this country are in. Several weeks ago, there was a young man that was killed in this state, and he escorted that body to the family. This is a very, the armed service chaplains just don't pick up the body, so to speak, and accompany it to the family. They stay with the family. They are in constant contact with them, supporting them during this time as they bury this loved one. Sometimes they have to get involved with, well, they naturally get involved somewhat with the funeral planning because of the presentation of the flag and blowing taps and so forth. But he's also there available to them in those days and nights after everyone disappears. And he and I have talked about that. He says it's a very tough thing, and I can imagine. And since as hospice chaplains, we do deal with death. But this is a different type of death. This is sudden. It could be bloody. It could be very, very unraveling, I guess you could say, for the family. They are in total shock. They're not expecting this. So this is ministry at the toughest. And I have all the respect and the love for this man for what he does, because he deals with our veterans, the veterans that we are honoring this weekend. So as we go through our time together, not only today, but in the days and nights to come, let us not forget who our veterans are. We'll be honoring, well, actually it'll be in Boxford, a father and a grandfather who passed away this last year. He's one of the ones of our veterans who have passed since our last Memorial Day. His name is I can't think of the name, LeBlanc. His grandson's name is Jake LeBlanc, 7th grade over in Boxford. And he got to thinking about his grandfather and how much he loved him and missed him. And he did a campaign and raised, I think, $1,437, which he gave to the local American Legion Post for their activities in service to their veterans. Now, he was thanked. There's a big picture of him in the local Tri-Town. So that brings it home to us in what we do. I don't know either family, but I do know that their Memorial Day this year is going to be a lot easier because of the love that this young man has for his grandfather. And I think that's our biggest charge here, is that we continue to do the work of the church here and practice the great commandment where we love our neighbor. Love our neighbors who are veterans, who have made sacrifices because they believe in what they're doing is right. So this morning, let us remember those veterans. And I encourage you to participate tomorrow in the parade to honor those that have passed. This morning, as we close with the last hymn, I'm going to ask you to do a little something different. For those of you that remember a few years ago, we had this hymn called Eternal Father, Strong to Save. And each verse, first three verses, has a verse about, to begin with, the Navy. I believe it is the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. So those of you that have relatives, loved ones, neighbors, whatever, stand at the appropriate time as we sing this hymn. And on the last verse, I ask if anybody remaining to stand, because somewhere in our family lineage, we have loved ones that have probably served this country. Because we honor not only the modern day veterans here, but those all the way back through the Revolution. And this town certainly have sent sons and daughters to serve in the military over the years. There's a plaque, I believe, out in the front that talks about some of the earlier members of this church. So let us remember today that God's with us. God's love is with us. And let us lift high those veterans who have passed. I ask for these things in God's name. Amen.